My name is Rachel. Standing at the podium during our annual company gathering, looking at the transformed organization below, I'm filled with a sense of accomplishment and reflection. 6 months ago, I was just an overlooked marketing coordinator, and now I'm about to announce our record growth numbers. It all started when I was publicly humiliated in a quarterly meeting. My boss, Mark Thompson, pointed at me and declared, "Everyone here is valuable to this company except the failure in marketing." The room fell silent for a moment, and then the laughter of my 30 colleagues filled the air. Some laughed nervously, while others were genuinely amused. Each chuckle felt like a needle stabbing at my heart. I had dedicated 5 years to this company, Arcadia Marketing Solutions. I would arrive before dawn and leave when the security guards made their final rounds. But in that moment, all my hard work seemed to mean nothing. Mark continued discussing quarterly projections as if he hadn't just destroyed my reputation. I sat there, motionless, with a frozen smile on my face. I refused to blink, for I knew that blinking would mean tears, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Looking back, I never planned to work at Arcadia. Fresh out of business school with a marketing degree and big dreams, I aimed for the top-tier creative agencies downtown. However, when the economy took a downturn, I took the first offer that came my way, a junior marketing position at this mid-sized firm. My first impression of Mark wasn't negative. As the marketing director, he had an air of confidence and charm. He always wore well, tailored suits, quoted business books in meetings, and had a way of making CEOs feel understood. During my interview, he leaned forward and said sincerely, "We're building something special here. I need people who understand that success comes from sacrifice." I believed him wholeheartedly. For the first 2 years, I accepted every assignment, volunteered for weekend work, and created presentations that he would present without giving me any credit. He would pat my shoulder and say, "You'll get your time. This is how careers are built." But the truth gradually emerged. I noticed that Mark presented my strategies word for word in client meetings, including the personal anecdotes I used as icebreakers. The company newsletter also highlighted his so-called innovative approaches that I had spent weeks developing. The real wake-up call came during the Riverview project. Riverview Technologies was a potential client that could double our annual revenue. Their CFO, MS, Grace Miller, was extremely difficult to impress. Mark had tried for months to secure a meeting with her, but failed. He complained in a staff meeting, "It's impossible. They don't return calls, and their gatekeepers are impenetrable." That evening, I stayed late to research MS Miller. I discovered that she volunteered at a local community center near our office. The next week, I signed up as a volunteer too. We sorted books side by side for 3 hours before the topic of business naturally came up. She was surprised to learn I was from Arcadia and said, "Your firm has been persistent." I simply replied, "We believe in what you're building, but I understand if we're not the right fit." She studied me and mentioned, "Your director, Thompson, is quite confident in your pitch emails." I carefully answered, "Confidence has its place, but I prefer listening first." 2 days later, MS Miller requested a meeting and specifically asked for me to attend. When I told Mark, his face lit up with triumph. I knew persistence would pay off, he said, already imagining the commission. "I'll handle the presentation. You can take notes." The meeting went smoothly because MS Miller directed all her questions to me. Whenever Mark tried to take over, she politely redirected the conversation. By the end of the meeting, she requested that I be her direct contact. Mark agreed enthusiastically in the meeting, but in the elevator, his attitude changed. "What did you do? How do you know her?" he demanded. I explained about the volunteer work. He sputtered, "That's practically stalking. It's unprofessional." I corrected him. "It's relationship building." And it clearly worked. The next day, Mark informed me that after consideration, he would remain Riverview's primary contact. "It makes more sense hierarchically," he explained. I understood exactly what he meant. That night, I made a decision. I created a separate contact list with my personal email and cell phone number and started quietly sharing it with key clients. I told them it was for after-hours emergencies, saying, Sometimes approvals can't wait for morning. They were grateful and used it not only for emergencies but also for various questions and concerns. Over the next 3 years, I built a shadow network of relationships. When clients called the office, they dealt with Mark. But when they needed real solutions, they texted me. I answered emails at midnight, made last-minute changes before dawn, and remembered their children's names and school achievements. To Mark and upper management, I was just an adequate but unremarkable marketing coordinator handling administrative tasks. To our clients, I was the indispensable problem solver who made their lives easier. The company's system showed Mark as the account manager for our top 20 clients, but the reality was different. 17 of those clients had my personal phone number on speed dial. 15 of them hadn't spoken to Mark without me present in over a year. 12 clients explicitly told me they worked with Arcadia because of my service. Meanwhile, Mark received performance bonuses for exceptional client retention. I wasn't the only victim of his credit stealing. My colleague Alex created an award-winning campaign that Mark presented as his own at an industry conference. Lily developed a digital analytics system that Mark showcased to the board as evidence of his technical innovation. Ryan's crisis management strategy for a difficult client became part of Mark's self-glorifying story. We would commiserate after work, but we needed our jobs, references, health insurance, and steady paychecks, so we endured. The humiliation in the quarterly meeting wasn't random. Earlier that week, we lost a potential client. It was the only presentation I hadn't helped Mark prepare because I was dealing with a crisis for our largest account. The potential client asked technical questions that Mark couldn't answer. Instead of admitting his knowledge gap, he made promises our team couldn't fulfill. When I learned about these promises, I sent a private email suggesting we clarify our capabilities before signing contracts. The client ultimately chose a competitor, citing concerns about transparency. Mark needed a scapegoat, and I became the failure in marketing. As my colleagues' laughter faded and Mark continued his presentation, something inside me changed. It wasn't rage. It was a cold, focused determination. I reached into my bag and took out a slim blue folder I had prepared months ago, never thinking I would actually use it. Inside were emails from clients praising my work, texts specifically requesting my help, and written statements from our top accounts confirming they worked with Arcadia because of their relationship with me. I slowly stood up, interrupting Mark mid-sentence. The room fell silent as I walked to the front, placed the folder in the center of the conference table, and said, "For the board's review." Then I walked out. My hands were trembling as I gathered my personal items, a plant, a framed degree, and a sweater for cold days. I left my laptop and phone because they belonged to the company, but I had backups of important information. Just as I reached the parking lot, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Wait." I turned to see our CEO, MS, Isabella Reed, clutching the blue folder and out of breath. At 55, with over 2 decades of executive experience, she usually showed perfect composure, but now she looked genuinely alarmed. "You can't just leave," she said. "I believe I can," I replied. "My employment contract requires 2 weeks' notice, which I'm happy to provide in writing." She took a deep breath and said, "You've just shown me that you personally control relationships with clients representing over 80% of our annual revenue. We need to discuss this." I looked at her directly and said, "Now you want to talk after I've been publicly humiliated after 5 years of watching my work become someone else's accomplishment?" She said quietly, "I didn't know." I corrected her. "You didn't want to know. Mark delivers results, and no one questioned how." She didn't deny it. "Come back inside, not to the meeting, to my office, please," she said. I considered walking away. Part of me wanted the satisfaction of leaving them to realize how dependent they were on someone they had undervalued for years. But I knew that burning bridges rarely led to new opportunities. So, I agreed to a 30-minute meeting. MS Reed's office was in the corner of the floor, overlooking the city. I had been there only twice before, once during my initial interview, and once when I received a 3-year service award. She closed the door and sat in a visitor's chair beside me. "I've spent the last 10 minutes reading client emails about you," she said, tapping the folder. MS Miller from Riverview says she would follow you to any agency. The Sterling Group apparently consults you before making marketing decisions, not us. 8 different clients refer to you as their actual account manager. She looked up and asked, "How did this happen without anyone noticing?" I replied, "People see what they expect to see. You expected Mark to be successful because he fits your image of success. You expected me to be forgettable because I don't demand attention." She admitted, "That's a significant blind spot on my part. It's a common one." She then asked, "What do you want, Rachel? A promotion? Mark's job? Name it." I hadn't prepared for this question. I had thought about walking away, perhaps with a settlement agreement to keep client information confidential. I finally said, "I want recognition, not just for me, but for everyone whose work builds this company while others take credit. I want a client service model that values relationships over personalities. I want transparency about who actually handles accounts and compensation that reflects that reality." She noted, "That's ambitious." I countered, "So is controlling 85% of your client relationships while being called a failure in marketing?" She nodded slightly and asked, "What specifically would this restructuring look like?" For the next 20 minutes, I outlined a vision I had been developing over the years. Account teams with clearly defined roles and visible contributions, compensation tied directly to client feedback and retention, and internal systems that tracked actual client interactions rather than title-based assumptions. When I finished, she asked about Mark. I said, "That depends on whether he's willing to work within a system based on accountability rather than appearance." She was silent for a long time and then said, "The board meeting is next week. I'd like you to formally present this restructuring proposal, not as a negotiation for your continued employment, but as the new director of client relationships, reporting directly to me." I said I'd think about it. She agreed to give me a week and said there would be no announcements until after the board meeting. In the meantime, she asked how to handle the situation downstairs. I suggested telling them I'd taken the rest of the day for personal reasons. The next 7 days were strangely quiet. I returned to work the next morning and received curious glances, but no one asked direct questions. Mark avoided me completely. I performed my usual tasks while mentally preparing for the board presentation that would either transform the company or end my time there. On the 3rd day, Alex caught me alone in the break room. "What happened after you walked out?" he asked in a low voice. "Everyone's talking, but nobody knows anything." I truthfully answered, "Nothing's decided yet." He studied me for a moment and said, "Whatever you're planning, I'm with you. We all are. Me, Lily, Ryan. Everyone who's watched their work become someone else's victory lap." His support touched me more than I expected. At home each night, I refined my presentation, anticipating every possible objection. I created financial projections showing how my proposed restructuring would increase retention rates and expand existing accounts. I documented case studies of similar models in other industries. I also made personal calls to our top 15 clients, explaining that changes might be coming and gauging their reactions. Without exception, they all wanted to continue working with me regardless of my title or the company structure. The night before the board meeting, MS. Reed called me. "Are you ready?" she asked without preamble. "Yes," I simply replied. She then informed me that Mark had requested to make a counter presentation, and she had approved it. My stomach tightened, but I said, "I see." She added, "This isn't a competition. The board needs all perspectives to make an informed decision." We both knew it was a competition for the future direction of the company. She also said she hadn't shared the client statements with the board yet and wanted me to present that evidence myself. The next day, in the boardroom on the top floor overlooking the city skyline, there were 10 people sitting around a shiny table. 8 board members, MS, Reed, and the company's legal counsel. Mark was already there, with an unreadable expression. "Yes." Reed made brief introductions and then turned to me. "MS, Rachel has proposed a restructuring of our client service model. Given her unique perspective on our client relationships, the board has agreed to hear her proposal." I connected my laptop to the presentation system, took a deep breath, and began. For the past 5 years, I've observed a fundamental disconnect between how we present ourselves to clients and how we actually serve them. This disconnect creates vulnerability in our business model and undervalues our most important asset, the relationships that drive client retention. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my vision. I described the actual functions of account managers versus how they were recognized. I presented data showing the correlation between client satisfaction and their access to consistent support personnel regardless of titles. I demonstrated how our current system created bottlenecks, miscommunication, and unnecessary hierarchy. Then came the crucial moment. To illustrate the reality of our current client relationships, I've provided each of you with a folder containing communications between myself and our top 20 clients over the past year. The board members opened their folders, and their expressions changed from polite interest to focused concern as they reviewed the emails, text messages, and written statements. I continued. As you can see, these clients believe they're working with me as their primary contact despite our internal systems listing others in that role. This isn't about individual achievement. It's about acknowledging the actual relationships that drive our business and restructuring to strengthen rather than obscure them. When I finished, the silence was palpable. The board chairman, Mr. Henry Brown, was the first to speak. This is enlightening and concerning. Mr. Thompson, your response? Mark stood up smoothly, adjusting his tie. His presentation showed that he had adapted well. He said, Miss Rachel raises valid points about our client service model, but her interpretation overlooks key factors. He showed a chart of client acquisition rates and argued that while relationship management was important, acquisition drove growth. In his view, he was the visionary and I was just support staff. He also said that restructuring created unnecessary risk as clients valued stability. After his presentation, the board members deliberated. When we were called back in, Mr. Brown addressed us. We've reviewed both presentations and the supporting evidence. This situation reveals significant oversight in how we've managed client relationships. He turned to me and said, Miss Rachel, your documentation of client communications is compelling. It suggests a level of relationship dependency that poses both opportunity and risk for the company. He then shifted to Mark and said, Mr. Thompson, your points about stability and specialized roles have merit, but cannot outweigh the reality of who our clients actually trust with their business. Yes. Reed took over and announced, the board has approved a modified version of Miss Rachel's restructuring proposal, effective immediately. We'll create a new client relationship department under Rachel's direction with transparent attribution of account responsibilities and compensation adjusted accordingly. We're also implementing a full audit of all client accounts to accurately document who manages each relationship, which will require a temporary reassignment of some personnel. She then turned to Mark and said, Mr. Thompson, your experience in presentation and acquisition remains valuable. You'll transition to new business development, focusing exclusively on bringing in new clients. Once acquired, these accounts will transition to the client relationship department for ongoing management. The demotion was clear, although tactfully presented. Mark's face remained expressionless, but a muscle near his jaw twitched. Outside the boardroom, MS. Reed pulled me aside and said we needed to announce this to the whole company that day. 2 hours later, the entire staff gathered in the largest conference room. The air was filled with curiosity and tension. MS. Reed explained the restructuring clearly, presenting it as a strategic evolution. When she introduced me as the new director of client relationships, there were surprised murmurs in the room. She also announced the new team structure. Alex would lead creative services, Lily would head analytics and reporting, and Ryan would direct crisis management. My colleagues' faces showed stunned recognition. All those whose work had been claimed by others were finally being recognized. Mark sat across the room with a rigid smile, and his new title was noticeably absent from the announcement. After the meeting, the transformation wasn't easy. The first week brought resistance from those who benefited from the old system. 2 senior managers threatened to quit rather than have their actual client contributions evaluated. One followed through, while the other changed his mind when a major client specifically requested to continue working with his junior associate. Alex, Lily, and Ryan embraced their new leadership roles with a mix of excitement and trepidation. During our first department heads meeting, Lily voiced their concerns. This opportunity means everything, but I'm terrified of failing. What if I can't handle the responsibility? I reminded her, you've already been handling it. The only difference is now you'll get credit for it. Mark's adjustment was the most difficult. New business development isolated him from existing clients and required skills he had claimed to have, but actually delegated. Without a team to generate ideas or prepare materials, his performance quickly exposed the gap between his reputation and his capabilities. 3 weeks after the restructuring, Mark appeared at my office door. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, his confidence clearly diminished. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same desk that had been his before. "This isn't working," he said. "I need support staff for new business development." I replied, "Everyone needs support. That's why we're building collaborative teams rather than hierarchies. You can't create presentations like Alex's team or generate the analytics Lily provides. Without that material, you can't land new accounts." He seemed to realize his situation and admitted, "You're right. No one person can do everything this business."